today we have the great honor to be with Arshad Ahmad. He's from the UK, currently in Saudi Arabia. He is the founder of Intoto Knowledge, and it's intoto.com if you guys want to visit his website. So he's a professional, decades of experience in knowledge management. So Arshad, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're currently doing with your company and some of the great missions you worked on?
Yeah, thanks, Aurelien. So, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Intoto Knowledge.com, and I'm working as a knowledge management consultant as well. So I will work for companies and also have my own company. And with knowledge management, I think there are days or even weeks where it can be a bit samey, like it is with a lot of jobs. But equally, the reason why up to now I've not got bored of this area is because of the variety. 1 minute I could be doing something on knowledge bases and knowledge banks and taxonomies and metadata, and then I could be doing a workshop on storytelling, or running a knowledge cafe, or building communities. And it's almost that broad church of things within this field that really keeps me interested, and that's why I've been doing it for a certain number of years.
So I'm not surprised. Like, very often when I ask these questions, people tell me in knowledge management is so interesting. That's why they stay in this field. But what got you started? How did you end up in knowledge management?
Yeah, sure. So I still remember I did my undergraduate degree in biology, and then I was a little bit stuck on what I wanted to do next. I didn't really have a defined career path. So everyone was jumping on the bandwagon of computers and IT and computer science. So I thought, okay, I had a little bit of an introduction to it, and I thought, actually, I quite enjoyed this as well. So I went to University of Manchester, which was my local university at the time, and I asked them, I'd like to enroll on a master's program, an MSc in computer science. So he said, well, you've actually missed the date for that for this year. You can go next year, as it happens, but would you be interested in doing an MPhil in an area of computation? And my specialism is his specialism. My supervisor, well, he wasn't my supervisor then, but he became it, was ontological analysis and meta modeling. So that was his focus, and he was saying this comes under the broader, the broader term of knowledge management. And I still use his words to this day, because the way he explained it, I was gripped, because the way he explained it was, if somebody has this experience, these assumptions, these values, these insight, and they walk out the door, and it's not being captured, there's going to be a whole load of problems for the person who then takes that place, because they're going to be reinventing the wheel, reworking processes, revisiting the same mistakes. So if there was some way you could capture this knowledge, it's obviously going to benefit the next person who's starting and an organization as a whole. So I thought, wow, this the challenge of this. I mean, I understood the challenge. I wasn't sure how to actually solve the problem, but that's what got me gripped, and that's where I started from academics, really. So I did an MPhil in knowledge management in an ontological area. Again, very academic. And then I started to work in companies after that.
It's very interesting. A lot of people, they come from the academic and then they enter in this field, while the field is actually very practical in a sense of, it's very hands-on, and you really need to implement new strategies. You mentioned that one of the things you really do is not necessarily asking people to write things, but finding the right people that got the knowledge you need. You mentioned you were more like a connector. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a little bit of a debate in, I think, information management circles and knowledge management circles. I know you're mentioning information, which probably different. Again, you're not talking about management as such. But I think I remember a consultant describing it as a little bit of a cul-de-sac argument, that if people get very, very hung up about what is data, what is information, what is knowledge, And as you just mentioned previously, I think when it's all said and done, this has to be highly practical and highly pragmatic. People aren't really interested in what is knowledge, what is information. I feel from the experiences I've had, they have a business problem. Okay, so you take away everything that you know. There's a business problem, a business challenge. Knowing what you know, how can you help solve that business problem? I think that's what they're more interested in, rather than being versed in what is knowledge and what is information and what is data.
Yeah.
So I'm only saying this because I like to make a bit of a distinction between knowledge management and information management. But I'm also careful not to poo-poo one or the other. So I think we need both. And information management to me is more about the kind of the written word. So more around, taxonomies and information architecture. And like I said, absolutely needed. The knowledge part, again, if it all depends on where you're coming from in terms of knowledge management, because if you ask 9 people about knowledge management, 9 professionals, they'll give you 9 different answers. That's one of the challenges, I guess. But I certainly think that, knowledge, if you believe that knowledge really resides in people, we always talk about the people, then, it can't really be written down. I remember somebody saying that knowledge goes into databases or knowledge bases to die, and I think that's maybe a bit extreme. But I do believe that, if we take the 80-20 rule, that you can only really codify 20% of what a person knows. The rest of it is 80% is tacit. So that's not to say that we don't have information management. I think, obviously when you make something codified and explicit, it's more robust. It can be reused because, as the saying goes, heads leak, heads forget, and heads lead. Yeah.
Let me try to clarify or try to understand what you just mentioned. According to you, we cannot transform someone else's brain into a database.
I'd say not completely, no. You couldn't be able to take someone's brain and put it 100%. Could you put in the salient points? Absolutely. I do. So I'm not saying we don't do it, but we focus as much on the tacit means as the explicit means.
No, I got it. Interesting. So you prefer with your clients focusing on, okay, so if you cannot get what people have in the brain, how are you going to manage the fact that some people are going to retire? And I guess it's one of the challenges with companies when you have executives with 30 years experience and they're about to, they're in their 60s, 70s, and they're about to leave the company. Right. That's one of the challenges, right?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I've worked on is knowledge retention. So what knowledge retention is about is really, I think the term some companies might use is unplanned attrition. Because if you've got planned attrition, then you can maybe manage that or be able to, deal for that. But unplanned attrition is, typically like just the things that you mentioned there, where there might be somebody with 20 or 30 years experience. And if you've got a company with a notice period of say 4 weeks and you've not really captured, and they're a key person, so call that a single point of failure. If you haven't done the right steps to capture that person's knowledge, you're stuffed. So if I take you through the journey with that, it would be typically, really, even knowledge retention it's almost too late, in all honesty. It's more damage limitation. It's better than not doing anything, but really as a mature knowledge management outfit, and not all organizations are mature in knowledge management. You might have a network of very vibrant communities of practice where, one person's knowledge then becomes a community of people's knowledge. And therefore you're mitigating the chance of that one lone ranger, if he was to leave, there's going to be all sorts of problems. But obviously it's either sometimes communities of practice, they're not really there, or if they are there, they're not really being used effectively. They're more like virtual rooms than actual communities. And then this is where you get the other stages of, as you mentioned, we might go through a series of interviewing techniques, okay, that are planned. So we're planned on the methodologies of the processes of the strategies that person follows. But as you mentioned, again, we're dealing with people, and this is whereas certain skills are good to be quite transactional and quite project management based, I guess what sometimes people don't understand is having that empathy for people. Because typically, even when people are leaving, if they're going to another job and they're kind of going happy, so it's not, I remember the first person that I interviewed for something like this, it was nothing personal. He was a nice person, and he contributed towards the company. He just found a role that he was happier to go to in a different company as it happened. So I think he almost felt guilty that he was leaving and taking this knowledge with him. So he was a very, he was very keen to contribute his knowledge. He was happy. If somebody is retiring, that's also, they might want to leave a legacy behind. But if somebody's being, for example, terminated, or they're not having their contract renewed, on the one hand, you're saying, well, actually, you're not good enough to work for the company or in some shape or form. But by the way, before you go, give me all your knowledge. That's just not going to work in my you don't understand human people.
It happens a lot for old people. You want to get new people or younger, and you try to push people, old people away, but you still want them to train the new wave of hires. And
right.
It does not feel right, because you ask them to share the knowledge, but they're not good. You don't want to keep them. Sense. So when a client call you and say, hey, we have 20% of the company that is going to retire in the next 5 years, your first reaction is, hey, you call me 20 years too late. That's what I understand from what you're saying.
Well, it could be, like I said, every company might be different. Maybe they've already got a mentoring program. So for me, they might not have even called it knowledge management, but what they're doing is actually living knowledge management. So they might have, a community of practice or a group where, that person is actively sharing their knowledge, any standard operating procedures that they've got, they've got somebody shadowing their work. They might have actually already have these in place, in which case, there's not really much we can do to improve upon. We can give them tweaks. Or like you said, it could be in a situation where, and it's typically companies that, it's horrible to say this, but maybe they don't value people the way they think they value people, because, you can't expect somebody, they say with knowledge, you can only, I think it was David Snowden who said this, you can only volunteer knowledge, you can't conscript it. You can't force people to do it. This is very much from the heart. And there might be ways that you can, I remember actually speaking to a client, and he actually gave me a very good tip, that he said, when you approach this person, because he wanted an exploration person to be interviewed, I said, you have to be nice, because they're doing us a favor in a sense. You can't force these people to share the knowledge. And he said, you're right. So why don't you, when you phone him, say, could you do us this one last favor? You've done so much for the company. You're about to leave. It would be really, really useful for us, and maybe it'll help you leave a legacy behind. So you're very much going into the thing of, you're really valuing and respecting that knowledge, rather than the other side where people have said, well, we won't release their final pay, or things like this, which is very much a carrot and stick approach, which I'm not really into. And it's not about me being into it. I know it doesn't make effective knowledge management either.
Yeah, and it doesn't work. Like, people will do it better. They would do a better job if they're doing for the legacy.
Right, for the legacy from the heart, and I think this is the skill with a knowledge management person. One of the skills would be to, how can you facilitate that knowledge? How can you elicit that knowledge? Because I remember somebody saying to me, whoa, are you going to give us this knowledge, being a knowledge manager? And I said, well, no, the knowledge is inside you, the knowledge is inside a person. Mm-hmm. My role, I feel, is to get that knowledge or that information from somebody who has it to somebody who needs it, to a customer, whether that's a person, whether that's a document, it could be either.
So we're talking about all people getting retired. And some of the knowledge, I guess it's quite obsolete when it comes to tools. It might be obsolete because they're old, so they've been doing the same thing for 30 years. Maybe the process is not the best. So part of what they learn over the years, it's valuable and it's worth sharing. But I guess not all of them is valuable. So do you have a process to vet and say, hey, this is the valuable part, this is really super interesting knowledge, but for this, maybe don't do it. We've got better tools. Young people are more familiar with digital. How do you deal with that?
It's an interesting question. So I think there'd be two ways. One would be the actual process itself. So when typically this is around interviewing, there's certain roles in this interview. So it could be myself as a facilitator. It could be somebody who's acting as the scribe, but typically that can also be myself as well, through audio recording and so on. And depending on the actual area, there could also be another subject matter expert present in the room, because there's certain times when I've done it when, in fact, the first time I did it, it went very well, and it was in procurement. I then did it in oil and gas, and you know when you've done a product or a document, you think I've done a really good job here, and you're expecting the person to say, you know, thank you for doing this, you've done great. They didn't say that. They said, you know, you put a lot of effort in, and I appreciate that, but this isn't what I said. And so this brought in this whole idea. Then we adapted the process to bring in a subject matter expert. So typically, the subject matter expert could be a person that would be able to ask the more technical questions, or you know, they wouldn't take over the interview, but they could be the ones asking that. Also, who we have in is, again, it's not always possible, but the person who's going to be the successor. So if the successor is still present, they can also ask the questions. And typically, if that's somebody younger, they might be asking questions that are more relevant to their role. The final piece would be that, again, as I mentioned, there's, you know, if we take this thing about somebody having the knowledge and somebody being a customer of that knowledge, when the actual document is completed, we call it a knowledge asset, which is a positive for a document, really. So when this knowledge asset is created, it might go back to that person's department, or they might put it into a community of practice. And the community of practice's role would then be, for example, to make sure every year to review that document and see if it's still current, if it needs to be updated. So, you know, it's then given to a subject matter expert to keep it, you know, away from being libelous, erroneous, and wrong, really, I guess.
Okay. All right. So moving to a more, still related question. When you see some of your clients, do you think it's more a process failure when they have problem, or is it because they don't use the digital tools? I mean, my question is about, does the new knowledge management, it's necessarily digital? I mean, those companies, they have the right process, but it's just that it's still old school process. But they still have community of practice. I mean, they have some structured process, but it's not digital. What is the general case here for clients?
So you know, when you mention this digital age, you're right. It's an interesting question, because really the three pillars, if you like, in knowledge management, I feel, are people, process, and technology. So on the people side, define roles and responsibilities, and you know, also the people change piece, and I'll come back to that. Then there might be processes, so people know how to do it. So maybe processes for learning before, during, and after. And then there's technology very much as an enabler or a supporting base, but that's absolutely needed. So if we look at knowledge management, maybe, you know, in caveman times, right? You know, cavemen used to hunt, and then they might make a drawing on the wall, you know, in the cave, if you like, to show, you know, their offspring, or, you know, other generations how to hunt. So knowledge management started, if you like, a long time before technology was available. With that said, would I want to go back to an age without technology? Absolutely not. So even though it's an enabler, it's an effective enabler. Now, I'm very focused on augmented reality, and I see a lot of value with that, combining that with classical knowledge management principles, if you like. However, if the change piece isn't done properly with that, if the needs analysis isn't done properly with that, it doesn't matter how amazing the tool is, doesn't matter how whiz-bang it is, or how much business value it's got, it's going to fail. I think it's 85% as a McKinsey study, 85% of all initiatives, I think, failed because the change piece wasn't right. So if you haven't done the right hand-holding, the right training, the what's in it for me, it's going to fail even if it's a good tool. And I think this is where the key needs to be with you know, even anything digital, and that can't be ignored. I mean, we're in awe of a lot of these technology tools, and there might be some absolute business value there, but it's not always clear to everyone. And this is where, again, these classical approaches need to still be there.
And that's why people need you. I mean, companies need you to make sure they use the right process with the right tools, because the tool itself.
I'd like to think so. Yeah, I'd like to think so. I think, you know, you know, the world doesn't begin and end with knowledge management, but equally, you know, we're contributing, right? You know, everyone should be contributing towards the business. You know, we're contributing in our way.
All right. A lot of your clients and a lot of your activities are with oil and gas companies. So I'm curious to know if is there any specificities or um, anything that is very particular in this industry when it comes to knowledge management. And
Well, yeah, I mean, I've worked in professional services. I've done things for charities, legal as well, and then I've got another associate consultant, and he brings his own knowledge. But what I liked about oil and gas is, in some ways, it's the purity of it. Because when I was working in other organisations, even having a lessons learned process was a hard sell. They were saying, we don't have time for this. We don't understand the value of this. Whereas if you know about oil and gas, one of the main imperatives is safety, and they can't afford to cut safety. So therefore, if there's a crude spill or God forbid something's blown up and it's caused a number of fatalities or injuries, they don't want to be repeating that. And therefore, lessons learned, the need for lessons learned, for example, which fits under the umbrella, if you like, of good knowledge management, is so blatantly obvious that you wouldn't be able to argue it. In a financial services firm, maybe they mess up a client's, a client's financials. It's not great, but no one's died, right? Not directly anyway. But with oil and gas, if you repeat the same mistake twice and it's a catastrophic event, then we're talking about damage to the reputation, damage to life, damage to the environment. It's a huge impact on everything. And this is why knowledge management in that sense is very, very crucial. And equally with communities, if we have one refinery here and we have a best practice, surely that should be adopted in other places as well. So that's what I like, that the value of it is very, very blatant compared to some other places where, even though I feel knowledge management could be applied anywhere, I think there are industries where it's less prominent and more prominent.
There's another industry where knowledge management is very important, is the space, rocketry. Because obviously mistakes is also very expensive. So you need to make sure all the safety measures are being implemented.
Right.
I like the fact that you mentioned that for the executive, they can really see the value. So the amount of money they spend in knowledge management, they see the return. It's money they don't have to spend in insurance or paying for any fire or any issue in the infrastructure.
Right.
All right. Okay, so now question is not necessarily related to knowledge management per se, but it's very interesting. What is the biggest mistake you made when it comes to getting information and type of knowledge? If you mind sharing one of your
probably the way I've talked, it might seem like I'm a very confident knowledge management professional, and I'd like to think for the most part I am, but it doesn't always. So this notion of I'm always saying in the business, it's about dialogue, not debate. We need to learn from our mistakes. We need to collaborate better. But I don't always do that in my private life. So one of the things again in knowledge management, I feel, is it's a great way of having decision support. So, and likewise with information, information and knowledge these are the critical success factors, I feel, in making the right decision. Yeah. And you've probably done this yourself where if you take a multiple choice question, right, sometimes you don't know the answer at all, so you might guess. Sometimes you've half got the answer, so you'll make an educated guess. But the best feeling you have is when you know exactly that this is completely the right answer, because you have that confidence in the decision you're making based on what you might have been taught before or what you've understood. And that's how I feel you should try and make every single decision, even in your personal life. And that way you won't run into problems. So when I invested in cryptocurrency, really because, I had a friend who was, waxing lyrical about it. And I think there's a little bit of blagging going on, if you understand the term, so I put this much in, I made this much, and I'm like, oh, right, okay, so to be fair, he didn't say put this much money in, but I just thought, wow, this sounds like a no-brainer, this investment. I didn't do any kind of research. I didn't speak to an expert. I just put that money in, and you know, my investment has gone down. Not lost it completely, but it's gone down to 1/4 of what I put in. So not brilliant.
So it's interesting. You mentioned you didn't do research. So it's not about having too much information or not reliable. It's actually you failing to ask the right question.
Right, Aurelien, and it could have been that, you know, investments they go down as well as up, right? So I mean, it could have been that after I've done all my research, they say that actually, you know, initially it could be that you'll see a fall, there is a fall, and that would have been fine, you know, because that way at least I'd made an informed decision. What annoys me a little bit is because I didn't make an annoyed decision. I made a very, you know, a rash decision.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you remember that as a knowledge asset and don't repeat the same mistake, it will be okay. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. I have a last question for you. Sure. If you have any piece of advice or any recommendation for people who are interested in the field, you know, for new people who wants to become a knowledge manager in the 21st century, what would you recommend them to do or to read, or any piece of advice?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I'll try and keep this short. The best advice somebody gave me was when I was getting considered for a role, I'd say a very, you know, prestigious role in my mind in knowledge management. Mm-hmm. And they said, you know, you've been shortlisted. And when I asked them, okay, how can I improve my chances? Because it was an ongoing process and they wanted to speak to me in another 6 months and go to work in you know, in their home country. Mm-hmm. So they asked me, I said, you know, how can I improve my chances? You know, let's be free and frank. So he said, you know, experience can be gained, yeah. Skills, they can be picked up. But what we're most interested in is your attitude and your values. And we like you, you know, and you know, it gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling, but that's not really what it's about. When I thought about it more, I thought absolutely, you know, rather than have someone who, you know, if I had someone to choose between two people and one person finished the spreadsheet, you know, 45 minutes earlier than the other person, but he upset the rest of the team, then I wouldn't want that person in the team. You know, do I want somebody who's lying to clients or, you know, externally and internally? No, I wouldn't. Yeah. You know, so to me, I think, and, you know, do we rise as a team and fall as a team? Is it really, for this, the behaviors aren't about that one person performing well. You all have to perform well, you know, and it's about bringing the team with you. So I think somebody collaborative, a nice person, and good listening skills like yourself, I think would be great.
Good. I think it's a very valuable piece of feedback because it's really echoing to what you just mentioned earlier about not asking people to share the knowledge, otherwise they don't get the paycheck. So it's about empathy. So you need to be a people person first. Yeah, it makes total sense. So thank you very much for sharing.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
Have a nice day.